Hello and welcome to Exotic Gardening UK, Yorkshire Kris Weekly, and on this week's episode we'll be looking at jobs to do in the exotic garden in October. So we're into October now, and unfortunately this is where for most of the exotic garden things do start to really slow down and our thoughts really do turn to winter preparation. So if you watched my September video, you know we cleared out the greenhouse, cleaned everything, and we took in the most tenderest houseplants. Well, I'm in the greenhouse now, and I've got plenty of empty benches here ready for lots of plants to come in to be overwintered. Nice and warm in here. So depending on how cold October is, there's certain plants we've got to bring in at certain times, and some plants we start protecting in situ outside as well. And this is really dependent on where you live. Some of these plants that I'm talking about you might not need to protect. So things like Musabaju, we might start thinking about them and protecting them outside by the end of the month. But really what we're going to concentrate on this video are the things that 9 times out of 10, so 9 out of 10 Octobers, the temperatures will have dropped enough, we'll have got enough sort of early signs of a few frosts to really start protecting our tender plants. So Ensete, Ventricosa, Morellii, Henebas, etc. will need bringing in for most people by the end of October into November. And I like to do this basically at the very end of October. So the last week of October is ideal for my location in most years to bring in my own set, and then that will sort of spill over into early November if I've not had time. And also things like the tender colocasias, they'll be all brought in October. Brugmansias, again, they'll be brought in as well by the end few days of October. It's great to keep out as many plants as you can outside to continue that colour, to continue that structure in your garden, but there are a time and a limit to what sort of temperatures a lot of these tender plants can take. And yes, a few dips down to freezing is fine, but if they get that too many times of too long a period, they will sulk and set them back a bit. So you do want to not cause too much damage to plants that might, like I said, Morellii, Ensete Morellii, they'll dip down to freezing, they'll be fine. You might get a bit of blackening on the outside of the leaves. It's okay to do that, but don't let it continue for too long before bringing those in. And also, the weather turns in October, because not only is it a lot cooler, it can be a lot wetter. And when it's wetter and cooler, it can take much longer for things to dry out. So things like the arid beds, we need to cover those in the end of October so that they have time to really dry out before winter really sets in November, December, January and February. It can be quite a long old winter. So things like that need to be done. So get your shelters ready and we can put them over the arid plants where they're needed. And also tender potted plants can be brought under cover as well. So I'm just going to go around the garden and show you a few plants that I'll be bringing in before the end of October. Now last month we took lots of tender cuttings of things like the salvias, the coleus, plectranthus and this iricine here. And because we've taken the cuttings and they've rooted nicely, we've still got all this foliage out in the garden, and even if we do get a frost in October, it doesn't matter. These plants will be damaged, but it doesn't matter because these will die off anyway. We've got the cuttings that we took last month and they'll provide next year's display, and it means we can leave out these plants as long as possible, and if we don't get a frost, we're all the way through to perhaps December, we've got this tropical colour hanging on right through autumn. And it's still not too late to take cuttings of these plants because they've not been frosted, and with some warmth in the greenhouse and a propagator, they'll root nice and quickly. So like I said, plectranthus, iricine, salvias, all sorts of bedding plants can be taking cuttings of, even things like petunias and geraniums as well, and you can grow those on for next year. So here we have 2 Ensete bananas. We've got Haniba on the left and Montbéliardii on the right, and these won't be happy after a light frost. So October for me is a time to chop these back, dig them up and overwinter them. And I've done plenty of overwintering on set videos, and I'll do a link again in the description below and in the top right corner. So these will be dealt with in October. Here we have two sort of tender types of colocasias, so El Peo and Hawaii on the right, and these you can see are a bit past the best now, especially on the right. You can see some botrytis where petals have fallen into the colocasia leaves and started to rot away. So these will be dug up in the next few days as we're into October now, and these will be kept sort of semi-dormant in the greenhouse, and you can dry store these if they've got big enough sort of bulbs, but in the case of these particular species they don't really get big bulbs, so they'll be kept ticking over on heat mat in the greenhouse. In the middle we've got a nice iricene. We've talked about taking cuttings. You can dig up the full plant as well, cut it back a bit, and you can overwinter that as long as it's over 15 degrees. Here around my Jabea palm I have lots of tender and half hardy succulent arid plants, and October is the best month to dig these up because they are too tender to have shelters put over them for winter in most cases. So things like the aloes and the aeoniums and echeveras, they need to be brought in over winter. So I will dig these up, pot them into some gritty compost and let them sit pretty dry over winter, frost free in the greenhouse over 5 degrees. So now we come to the hardy arid plants. Well, I say hardy, they are cold hardy, but not necessarily wet hardy and UK winter hardy if they're completely exposed. So for instance, we've got Agave americana in this bed in front of me and some other agaves, and they do need covering to keep the worst of the winter weather out of the crowns especially. We don't want snow and ice getting in there, and we want time for the ground around them to dry out a bit. So end of October, maybe into early November is a time where I'll put up the winter shelters, and they don't have to be elaborate constructions. All you need to do is basically cover the tops of them so that rain and moisture therefore can't settle in their crowns. It doesn't have to be sided all the way around, as long as it's on the top and slanted into the prevailing wind so the rain doesn't come in through the sides, and that will be fine. And depending on the size of your bed, your plants and how much space you've got to work with, you can construct something with some posts, some polycarbonate or a plastic sheet over the top. And if you feel it's a bit too exposed, you can put some sides on them as well, but you do want airflow, so don't completely cover it on most arid plants and palm trees as well, like this Bria amata, which can benefit from a rain shelter, although now my particular plant's getting very settled in and quite big, quite a good sized trunk. This doesn't really need any protection in most winters, and we don't need to protect any palms whatsoever in the garden well into November, December, until we get real cold and snow, if at all. So arid plants, yes, get the shelters over them in October, early November, and they hopefully can be taken off next March and April, ready for another growing season. And also in October, it's really good to go around the garden again and check you've not missed any very tender plants before the first frosts arrive in your garden. So for instance, this Spanish moss, which is on my eucalyptus tree, that really needs to be brought in before it gets frosted. So I'll be bringing this into the greenhouse and to the bathroom as well, where it likes that humidity, and I'll be doing that before we get our first frosts. So I've shown you a few of the plants in my garden and a few of the plants that you might have in your gardens that need some work, some protection, some thought in October. So be organised, look around your garden, work out which plants you think you're going to need to protect before the end of the month, and get ready to protect them, and give yourself time to do it, because a lot of us work full time, the days are very short, so there's not as much time as in summer to actually work in the garden, get jobs done. And you've got to think about plants which might completely die if they get frosted off. So things that are still out, that you've left the odd sort of house plant or very tender plants, focus on bringing them under cover first. Then things like the Ensetes, colocasias, and don't worry about things like the Musa baju too much. The palm trees or the tree ferns like this one behind me, they can wait until it gets really cold, so don't focus on those. Focus your energies on plants that might die if they get a really cold snap. And we can't always plan for what might happen. You might get struck down by illness or something like that, or you have to go away and do something else. You might be away from your garden and the cold weather comes, so don't play chicken with the weather and wait to the very last second to protect your plants. Think ahead, plan, and get your precious plants protected in good time so you're not worried about them at the last minute. And there's still time to enjoy colour and structure and form in the garden. I've had a quick look around and I've got dozens of plants still in flower. We've still got the salvias, we've got the reds and the blues, the pinks and the purples, all in flower still. We've got the gingers, we've got the ginger forrestii that's still flowering, and we've got gingers that have yet to flower, like the Hedychium greenii, which are just about to come into bloom. We've got the dahlias, we've got the Epimea lambata, we've got the Cleome, we've got the Tiphonia, we've got all the plants that have been blooming right through the season from June and July onwards, and they'll carry on until the first frost. So enjoy the garden as much as you possibly can. Hold on to that colour, hold on to that exotic feel until we get the real cold weather. And then join me for my November video when we'll start protecting plants that need protection when it gets really cold. Thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. Join me next week where we're doing more in the garden.